before we optimized, this is the first of 2 pages on our lead form. So that chart you just looked at had up to 10 fields on it. Ours had 18 form fields. And you might say, well, that's ridiculous. Why on earth would you do that? And that's kind of what I said coming in, was like, do we really need 18 fields? And what it came from was, I think this happens more often than not. It came from the agents that we work with and our sales team. They said, if we can get more information, then we can serve the customer better. If we can know more about their situation going into the call, then then we know more about them. We can better customize that call to them, which is all great. It's just gotta, there's just, when you swing the pendulum too far that way, you end up with something like 18 form fields, and that's a lot of hoops to ask somebody to jump through. And so we walked through and we kind of assessed this form field and said, okay, I want to keep everything here that's actually critical to the transaction. I want to keep lead volume up as much as possible. I want to get the agents the information they need to close the business. But let's look at a few of these fields and say, are these really, really necessary? So, why are you selling your house? Do they really need to know that? How much does that change the conversation? It definitely does. If you're moving, if you're wanting to downsize because you're in a later stage of life, or you're relocating for a job, that matters, but can you close the business without information? My favorite is that one at the bottom there. Is this a mobile home? How many people have mobile homes where this is even relevant to the conversation? And so, we kind of went through. We said, okay, let's pare this down a little bit. Let's make this more reasonable. And I'm sure some agent said, if I would have known they had a mobile home, I would have talked to them a lot differently, or I would have given them a different option. And so it was there. But that was just the first page, and here's the second, more just kind of your standard personal information. So we said, okay, we want to start testing this. We don't just want to jump in. I know 18 fields is too many. I know they don't need all that information to close the business. So let's start split testing. Let's pare it down to, let's talk to some of our top agents and understand what they really need, and we'll pare down the list to there. And so this is kind of what the new form looked like, where we had you have the option to choose buy or sell, and then we had 4 pieces of information that we collected. So when you expand buy or sell, you would see it was about 8 fields, and so really stripped it down to something that, in talking to those agents, was more relevant to them. It was really all that they needed. The other stuff was good to have. This was the stuff that they really needed. And so very similar on the buy side, 7 fields instead of 8. But let's back up for a second. That's kind of the what. Like, that's the split test that we did. And I want to go back to the goals, because again, it all is relevant to the goals that you have and balancing the needs of your business. So I would say the why we chose that split test, why we stripped out those fields, started with the business objectives. And I think this is pretty common when you talk to a business leader. They usually have just one goal in mind, which is something like, I'd like to increase revenue by X%. It's revenue or profit is usually the easiest thing to say. Is this is what I'm looking to get out of marketing or out of sales, and so that was really all that they came to the table with. We said, okay, tell me your goals. We'll work within that. We'll present the plans, and so that's what they started with. But the problem there, and we'll go back to the loop in just a second. The problem is, that's a fairly narrow-minded view of what you really want to happen. So we talked through it. We went back and forth. We said, okay, that's the broader business goals. Working within that for marketing. We said, okay, marketing, that translates to, on the marketing side, to 2 things. And this was where the second one is really the one that was the change in mindset and change in business. We wanted to increase lead volume by 20% over the course of last year, and also the same goal for this year. But we also wanted to maintain lead quality within what we felt was an acceptable range. So we would keep lead quality from being to being within 4% of what it is today. And so the second one was not even on the radar at first. It was really talking through, okay, so if we just, I mean, we could just buy some traffic and get people to sign up. I have no idea what the lead quality would be on that. Do you want that? You know, it's like, whoa, we don't want any type of lead. We want people who are as quality as we have right now. And so we kind of had to have that back and forth and that discussion with them. So on the first split test, balancing those two goals, we increased lead volume by going from 18 fields to 8 by 55% for the real estate service. So didn't increase traffic at all, but just through this, we just better converted our traffic by 55%. But the quality went down by just a little over 5%. And so we said, okay, we had 4% as that threshold. How did we assess, like, what is lead quality? How did we figure out, you know, what is 5% a problem? Is 4% okay? We did it two ways. Okay, so when the lead comes in, the agents reach out to those people, and if they can't get in touch with them, or if they're just junk leads, then they mark a status of that lead. So we can track those statuses and say, okay, the negative statuses, they kind of go from a new lead down to pending or listing, buyer, closed, you know, kind of following the path of the real estate transaction. But if they go into something like a dead status or just, you know, cannot contact, out of area, something like that, those were our negative leads. And we said, okay, so what impact does that have on the experience? What is that doing for customers? We started talking to our agents, and they said, you know, we just feel like the leads aren't as good as they were. And that feel, I mean, it's such an emotion, it just feels different, you know, and that's, you can always try to communicate your way out of that, but that's always an uphill battle. And so that's one thing. The agents kind of gave us some feedback saying, you know, this isn't the quality that we're used to. And then on the customer side, this was fascinating. We were doing, you know, we do some follow-up calls to our customers and say, how happy are you with the service? We have a 98% satisfaction rating. And when we made this change for the customers after that, it went down to about 94%. So we actually saw a negative on both the agent side and the consumer side. And so when we're talking about the loyalty loop, what we did was we took this part of it and kind of said, okay, this is going from evaluation down to purchase. That's kind of a funnel that we optimized within the loop, but it had a downstream impact that was negative for the business. The post-purchase experience was worse for the customer and for the agents. And so the agents, ultimately, these are high-powered agents. You know, they don't take leads from most places, but they do with us because of the quality of leads that we give them. And so, like, that's something that we have to balance. And so it was fascinating to, you know, to look at it within this context, because you know, you don't lead when you're talking to a business with the loyalty loop. You don't start the conversation there. Hey, we have this macro engagement model. This is how we need to operate with it. It's more like when that problem started coming up, it was a way to add context. It was a way to say, okay, this is a conversion funnel that we're doing around our lead form. But when you look at let's take a bigger picture. When you look at the loyalty loop in this experience, well, if we decrease the post-purchase experience, when it's time for them to buy a new house, which is their trigger event, you know, it takes the average person 3 to 5 years when they buy a new house. We want them to be thinking of us. We want them to be thinking of our service or our agents. And so, you know, 94% is not acceptable to us. So, so we did a second split test, and I think we added 3 fields back. You know, we didn't add the mobile home field. Still not needed, but we did add things like how long until you're looking to move, something very relevant to the conversation. We also, I think we did add back in why are you moving, because that really changed the dynamic of the conversation. And so we just added 3 fields back. So it still ended up being, I mean, 10 to 11 fields, still on the high side of that chart we looked at. But the results for that split test were that we still increased leads by 40% or so. And on the negative side, the quality went down by a little under under 3%. So then we said, okay, that's 3% is great. What does that actually mean in terms of how the agents feel and how the customers feel? And again, it was just so fascinating because to me, 5% versus 3% really not that big of a difference. Like just when I hear it at first pass, it doesn't stand out that much to me. But the agents were like, "This is great. Everything is just like it was. You guys fixed the problem," you know. And on the customer side, I mean, by extension, if the agents are happy and they're treating the customers the same way, you know, our satisfaction went basically right back up to 98%. And so it was the funniest thing how, yeah, go for it.
How do you measure quality of the lead again?
Yeah. So we look at it as when you look at this type of lead, you know, our agents, the agents in the field are actually kind of our sales team. They're the people who are responsible for converting the leads into actual business. And we have basically an interface, a hub for them to log in and update the status of each lead that they're trying to close. And so we have a group of kind of negative statuses where if they can't get in touch with somebody, or if they put in just junk information like Mickey Mouse or something like that, they'll just mark them as a dead lead. And so we were tracking the percentage of the overall leads, how many of them were going to one of those negative statuses. And really what we were looking for is there's two reasons why somebody will kind of fall out of that sales pipeline. Either they're not really a viable lead, or the agent can't close the deal. And that's not really something that has anything to do with the lead form. That's more in their competency, and that's something we can train up and improve through different ways. So really we were just looking at, you know, within the first few days after those leads come in, how many of them went to a dead status or a junk lead status, and we track that as a percentage of overall leads. So that's how we did it in that case.
What did you attribute the decrease in consumer satisfaction to? That's very amazing.
So it actually it gave us insight into the business that we didn't have before, because this lead form had been there for years. Now, and it's kind of a funny backstory is when the EOP business first started, first of all, this was 2002, and we were just barely on the web at this point. The way that process worked was you would call in and you would give us your information over the phone. We would then fax the information out to the agent, and we would do it once a day, but it would take an average of about 3 days. And if you submitted your lead on Friday, we'd get to it sometime early next week. And so very humble beginnings in terms of that process. And so to have that lead form as big as it was automated, and it was much better for us. We had that lead form for a long time. And so everybody, I guess the agents had just grown accustomed to having all that information, and really their confidence went down in the leads, and they started treating them differently. Like that's basically, that's what we realized, that we have agent confidence that we need to manage that we didn't have to manage before. And so part of that was just education, part of that was training, and we did some of that. But you know, part of it too was, you know, perception is a funny thing. That's a delicate thing to manage. And so it was just an aha for us as a business of, you know, the leads are actually just, I mean, all of them are just as good, but if they treat them different, they're not going to close the business as well. And so that was a really big insight for us.
If they don't have their dog's name as a field,
right.
I can't close that deal.
That's right. Well, see, and the other thing too is when you talk to the top agents in our group, they're like, just give me the lead, I'll close it. And they're, you know, like the best of the best. And it's for some of our other agents that we didn't talk to, for some that, you know, we're talking about people who close upwards of 200 transactions a year, really, really high volume agents. When you get down into the ones that close 40 to 60, that's still a significant amount of business, but they didn't feel the same way. They didn't feel as like, just give me the lead, just give me a name and a phone number, and I'll close the deal. You know, they had a little bit more of the, I really want to customize the call to this person. I don't feel like I know them as well, and so it was just kind of an understanding and aha that, you know, we went into it saying, if we increase leads, then we'll increase revenue. And, you know, typically that's true. If we increase leads to the old lead forms the same way, increase traffic to it, increase leads, the revenue will pretty much be lockstep with it. And it just wasn't that simple here. And so it was a great educational opportunity for the company to say, here's the reason why this is happening. You know, this post-purchase experience is critical. It's critical to the customer. And long-term for the business, it's even more because, like I said, we have 5 or 6 services we offer. And it's time for you to do your taxes. And it's time when you're thinking about getting new insurance. We want you to be thinking about EOP. And if you've had a bad experience with that agent, then that trigger event, you're going somewhere else. You're looking at other partners. And so just wanted to kind of confirm, we had this visual on the conversion marketing side of this is the kind of result you can see. And for the real estate business, this is actual results over the course of last year. That's how the lead volume looked. We changed it in March, and the lead volume basically we had a new baseline for performance from that point on, and it continued on. This is basically through 2013. When you get into conversion optimization and doing that year after year, once you start doing those first changes, the next thing you do is start doing things for the next year, right? So when you get into March of 14, you could go right back down to flat because your year-over-year performance would be the same until you continue to do more optimization and more optimization. So
I've got a question.
Yeah.
Maybe not appropriate at this point, but your split test that you talked about showed the number of leads, or the number of questions impacting fulfillment of the form, the quality of leads. Did you do any split test to determine which one of those questions is more sensitive?
Yeah.
And to determine it's not just 3 questions, but which 3 questions or which 10 questions?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a good example of how you have to balance, the speed of business with trying to get perfect data. In that case, we said, well, we can't test each form individually because the sample size we need for that was just prohibitive. I mean, it takes too long. We don't want to spend the next 2 years testing each combination form. So what we basically did was we just relied on a whole lot of qualitative data with our agents. We just set up really hundreds of calls to. It was kind of business that we were doing anyway, so we just kind of tacked it on to calls that we were making as a team. And we just said, okay, we have 5 fields that we've removed. Rank these in order of importance. Which one do you use the most? Which one do you use the least? And we had pretty clear winners coming out of that. It was just a simpler way to get in. Yeah.
I've got another question about
Okay.
About your form. Sorry to get this deep, but I find this fascinating.
Yeah.
It looks like you use a conditional form where you display a smaller number of fields, and then when they click on something, you gave them a few more.
Yep.
Is that correct? Is that
Yep.
what you did there?
So we did a UX change as well. So that's a good point. So we went from 2 pages, right? So if you look at the tabs, you have selling info and then contact info. And then what we did was we condensed that into 1 page and basically made it. We do have those conditionals. You have this decision tree of are you selling, are you buying, or are you doing both? All 3 of those options exist. So we just consolidated all that into 1 experience, 1 page, and said you can click both of those radio buttons or just one, and we'll then ask you the questions relevant to that option. Yeah.
I'm curious, did you test without the conditional, just showing kind of all these fields, or was that essentially what you had on the previous?
Yep, it was. We had that same conditional. We just did it a different way. We just asked you. It was basically a page before you got to the form that said, "Are you wanting to buy, sell, or buy and sell?" So you had this. You had the same choice, and then we just dropped you on one of those 3 lead forms. We took that page out, put them all in the same.
We've always been big proponents of the conditional. The concept being the fewer fields you display, the more likely somebody's going to start it. But once they start it, they're kind of committed. And so if you start off with 4 fields and then they click something and you show them 4 more, they're already in process.
Yep.
But we've never had enough data to really test out that concept. So this is
Yeah, our UX guy that was working on this with it, he was really a strong proponent of trying to make it as much of a conversation as we could. You know, are you looking to buy? Are you looking to sell? We were trying to get as close to, if you're talking to somebody on the phone, what that phrasing would look like. And so that's kind of how it ended up that way. But yeah, no, great question. Is there another one?
Did you find the perception of the agents of the quality of the leads change when they receive 45 or 50% of leads?
So the short version is our agents, being that they're so high volume anyways, their tolerance level on getting more leads is very, very high. They're like, the more the merrier. Send me everything you can, and I'll convert it the same. Now, in reality, so from their perception side, no, like they're more just like, send it. If you could triple it, great. That's awesome. We have seen, as we've tracked, we have like a success ratio for how much business they actually convert. As we track that, we do notice a pretty gradual decline in how much business they're able to convert based on that volume. And we do have, we kind of have a threshold where, you know, if they go anything above that, it is a little bit agent to agent specific, but we do find performance decline. So we don't have a perception issue with them, but internally it is something we do manage and do mitigate. So how we do that is we take a territory and we keep breaking it down until we have the right amount of business, the right amount of lead volume that we send to that agent. So in some cases, for a low population area, you might manage multiple zip codes. In a major area, you might manage just a portion of one zip code, depending on where your office is and you know, where you sell homes and buy homes for the customers. Did you have a question? No? Okay.
Since you've already interrupted you,
Yeah.
Did you do any type of, when all this analysis marks and yourself serving again, looking at the difference in conversion from a PC browser versus a mobile browser?
Yeah, that's something we track very, very intently because it is. I mean, mobile now. Since I've been there, I've been at the Dave Ramsey company for 2 years. When I first got there, mobile was about 35% of our traffic. It's now 65%. So I mean, it is skyrocketing. Now, a lot of that's based on our activity. We're very heavy on social media, and we drive a lot of traffic through our blog, which is very mobile oriented. And so we are marketing that to happen. But yeah, absolutely. That's part of why you see the form field. This was kind of a mobile first design, and I've got the desktop views here for both of these things. But that was something we were trying to get ahead of at the time, was just to say, we know we need to make it easier and easier and easier for people on a mobile device. And the conversion rates are lower for a mobile device, but it's so far within like the kind of the standard benchmarks of mobile versus tablet versus desktop conversion rates that we feel pretty comfortable with where it is. And so, you know, the thing, I love working in a company like this. All these benchmarks that I have in my head kind of coming into the business, I have to kind of set aside because Dave's got such a loyal fan base that our open rates, our engagement rates, our conversion rates are higher on a consistent basis than I've seen any business I've worked with before. And so people are just, you know, they're just very dedicated to, and they put a lot of trust in him. He's done a lot to earn their trust, and I think it's funny how that plays out from a conversion standpoint. So the way I wanted to close this was, okay, so we talked about a lot of concepts. I know I packed a lot of information here into 1 hour, but going back to the loop. So, you know, I'm trying to think of, if I'm sitting there and I want to take this information back to my business, if I want to start using some of this to steer some of the marketing that I'm doing, the first thing I would say is, you know, how much time are you spending on conversion optimization? You know, that's question number one. How much are we doing to begin with? If you're not spending, I would say the average business I've encountered spends less than 5% on conversion optimization versus campaign marketing, promotions, ad spends, media, more traditional, more tangible things like that. And so that's kind of question number one. But if you do get into it, there's kind of, I kind of look at it through two lenses. There's the way that you need to communicate it out to stakeholders, but then there's the way you need to manage it as a marketer. And so I'd like to talk through the latter there first. And so I would say the first thing, I would kind of take a broad to specific approach. What does the loyalty loop look like for your business? And if I were to answer that for our business, I could answer that for EOP real estate. I could answer that for EOP across all its services. I could answer that for Dave Ramsey across all of our products and services. And that would be a very large, very complex loop with all sorts of different loops on it, because we are in the business of helping people with their personal finance. That is a lifelong engagement from the time that you start managing money when you're in teens all the way through to retirement and beyond. And there are steps all along the way, products and services we have all along the way to engage you there. And so it is a massive, massive loop. But you can narrow it down and make it really specific to, in this case, just real estate. So I could walk through for us what that looks like. So defining your loop is really important. That would be a big takeaway. And then, kind of like how we looked at with the conversion funnel, I would overlay your different marketing channels with each of the areas, all the key points of the loop here, and just to kind of give you a lay of the land. So one of the things that we did when we started doing that with ELP was we look at email as a marketing channel, but by and large, the majority of our emails really happen down here. We have a newsletter, so you could say that could be part of the evaluation process, and that could even be a conversion funnel before the point of purchase. So email could fall up here, could fall here, could fall here, and just understanding, where each of those marketing channels fall is really important. And then I would then, once you can start doing that, you can say, okay, let me break this down into more digestible funnels. And think about how do I get awareness? How do I go from awareness to consideration? How do I go from consideration to purchase? And that's the one we talked about today, going from consideration to purchase. That is a pretty digestible funnel within this bigger context. And if you can do that, then you can basically triage and talk about which one is most important. The closer you get to point of purchase, generally the bigger results you're going to see. And if I was talking about optimization strategy, I would say start here, work your way back to here from an optimization standpoint, because I would say better convert the traffic you have than work on building more traffic to your site and then convert it better. And then once you can get that, then you can work on this experience and really how it continues on. And so even for the marketers that are in conversion marketing pretty heavily, I would see about 40% of time being spent here close to the point of purchase, and another 30% or so here on the awareness side, getting customers into that initial consideration set, and really just a really low percentage of time in the post-purchase experience. Yes?
So the businesses that tend to not have, I guess, as high a return on volume, because say, like one or two businesses, say, please don't do this unless you're in emergency or 2 years when you do that.
Yeah.
I've noticed in our business, once we're done, we've got the initial consideration set, we've got, people come to us all the time for that. We're great with, the purchasing part, driving the customer through the whole process.
Yep.
But once it's done, once that last step is around, they kind of drop off.
Yep.
And we do have return rate, but how do we gather more of that after the sale is done, after all the work is completed? How do we get those customers back after 2 years?
Yeah, it's a great question.
I've heard is constant trying to complete that. I complete that email.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't, for something like that, I don't know a ton about that business, but I definitely wouldn't be, if you said, what does a drip campaign look like? It wouldn't be like monthly communication with that person for 2 years, right?
Right.
How much do they really care about those buds that are now coming back out on the tree that they're really not going to have to trim down for, several more years? And so, in that case, like that one's more about really what you want to. Your trigger event is kind of like when somebody's ready to buy or sell a new home. Like, we're not trying to convince you to buy or sell a home. we just want to be there when you think about it. When you're ready as a family to move, we want to be one of the options on the list again. And so for your business, I would say something like, if it's like a 2 to 3 year average window, I might do just 1 or 2 communications getting closer to that. If you have a CRM and you can track that customer, and like how long it's been since the last transaction with them, maybe a 1.5 years out. It could be something as simple as, just getting that seed planted in their head of, in about 6 months, most people are trimming things back again. And it's all you want is for 2 years is a long time to remember a brand. Unless you guys have just a really funny or really creative, brand, then it could be just those guys that we use to come trim the trees.
Right.
So just kind of jogging that memory of this is who we used would probably be the one I'd be looking for there. Yeah, no, that's a great question.
You mentioned you like to explore with business units. Do you also do that for each of your different customer types?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you're for the Dave Ramsey business.
Yeah.
Your early young customers would probably have a different loyalty.
Yeah.
than the older ones. So you overlay those, or you use 2 separate groups?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I'll be perfectly honest with you guys. That's something that to get really sophisticated, to get really, really good at all the different customer types. So we have between 3 and 5 million visits to our site per month, and it's really people of all age types. We have a school curriculum product for kids in high school, and we have products all the way through retirement and beyond. So when you have that many different personas and that many different stages of life, I would say we focus on the top 5 primary ones and really focus our energy there. But the nature of what we're looking to do over that long of a period is to continue building out those personas and getting into more and more different types of people and stages of life. It's just, honestly, it's such a big undertaking. We don't have it all mapped, but we do have the most common use cases or the most common personas mapped. I wouldn't say we do the loyalty loop. We don't do too much. We do it more based on your interest area and your baby step. So we have a 7 baby step program. It's really simple, really straightforward, and it doesn't matter what stage of life you're on. You can plug into it and you can follow that plan through to financial security. And so that kind of allows us to say, it doesn't matter if you're 20 or 50, if you're on baby step 2, you need to get out of debt, And now the how we talk to you changes, but still, the program is still the same. So that gives us a little flexibility there. But we're going from, we're going from, as a company, a very analog business to a very digital business. And that's something that's been a 10-year, 15-year transition at this point and beyond. And so I would say we've gone from kind of a one-size-fits-all program. Dave on the radio show, he kind of customizes things based on the caller. That's kind of our personalization, quasi-personalization, if you want to call it that. But we're trying to go from being a one-size-fits-all digital experience to being more personalized and segmenting and grouping. It's just, when we're talking about trying to reach all of America, it's just it's a lot of segments. So, yeah, no, it's definitely our goal and our vision for it. It's just, it's like a career's work to do it.
So what tools are you using for split tests?
Yeah.
Analyzing results?
So we use different types of tools for different businesses. Really, the primary analytics engine that we use is Omniture. So we do a lot of things with Adobe, and we have Test and Target, and so very robust analytics engine and testing engine. I guess they call it Target now. They rename their stuff every year. But we also use for some of our smaller businesses, for things that are we have a few dozen different web properties for different personalities, smaller brands. We do use Google Analytics on the analytics side for some of those, and so it's really trying to find the best fit. We use Optimizely for some of our split testing as well, and so we just we try to look at it as we want as much consistency as possible, but doing things the right way in Omniture and Target can be pretty burdensome if we just did it for every little test, and so we try to be as flexible as possible there. And
Urgency in terms of the effort required because the tools are complex or cost?
It's more the domain knowledge for those tools. I mean, it's the trade-off of you can do anything you want. I mean, they're very, very robust tools. At the same time, the learning curve, the domain expertise needed to do them well, scalably across all of our different businesses to add that enterprise consistency is probably the biggest challenge that we get with it. So that's kind of the give and take that we use. But for example, another tool that we use, they have a click map tool that does scroll mapping and click mapping. I'm not a fan of, and so we just use Crazy Egg for a lot of stuff. Crazy Egg is pretty simple. It's a pretty straightforward tool that you have to do on a per page basis. It's not like it's cascaded out to every page on your site, but the information you get from it is fantastic. And so, if you ask me the same question next year, it'll probably be different tools, different answers. But it's always just trying to balance that speed of business. We want to do right. Yeah, it really is. There's as many people as we have, it feels like we're not doing much. There's the pace of technology is changing so fast. So. Yes.
Tim Leaper Roofing is kind of an example of what our business is. After you use this young ladies for 10 to 20 years, now that y'all have gone off of, what was it, 99, she was on for 10 years or something?
Yeah.
Now that that's disappeared, I don't ever hear Tim Leaper, advertising. Is he still like on the website? Do you encourage locals that want to use the ELK system to sign up?
Yeah. So on the you're talking about for the radio show, right? Yeah. And you're talking 997 being on the channel. The way the deals we have with the radio stations is we barter with the ad space. So we have our national advertisers, and those take up about half the ad slots, and then there's the local advertisers, which the radio station itself controls. And so we do have some local advertisers that we manage too. Tim Leaper, I'm not sure about them in the Nashville area, but I can put you in contact with the right person internally to confirm that for you. Just follow up after this meeting.
How long do you run your task?
Yeah, great question. We ran it. The first split test we ran for about a month and a half, and one of the complexities. This is the most complex in terms of understanding business impact, because it's not the nature of our business model is we need to understand how much business the agents actually convert. And it's not like when you submit a lead, you're ready to buy or sell a house today. I mean, some people, even if they're very serious, it might take them 6 months to find a home. And so the majority of our leads close between 3 and 9 months after they submit a lead. And so that alone adds a whole level of complexity to this split test. But we were able to get the qualitative information on the first test pretty quickly. So after a few weeks. And the sample size wasn't quite sufficient. If you ask me, the confidence level of that 55%, it's not as high as the confidence level of the second split test. But we ran the second split test for about 5 months, and that's the longest I've ever run a split test for. And it wasn't for sample size. It was more, the initial results are great, but before we push this out to 100% of our traffic, I need to make sure, this is the business leader, I need to make sure that we can actually close this increased business. And if we can't, then I would rather just go back to, even if we're getting more lead volume, I'd rather go back to the old ones. And so that was a highly sensitive thing. It took really months of going back to the data, and saying it's still looking good, because there was just a lot of concern about changing something that had been the same for 10 plus years. So it was fun. It was a fun kind of change management exercise. But we ran it from March through September, as long as it took for the business to be. We've seen the results have held since then. People on Pixar just to say, has it gone back the other way just to keep going? So, but still, and if it did, we would just change it and go back to some other mix.
Well, great. Thanks so much.
You want to take a picture?
Yeah, thanks for everyone for coming, and thanks to the EC for hosting this. We continue to try out different venues. This is the third venue we've had in 3 events, and I've just overhearing some people saying it's the first time they've been to the EC. This is an incredible asset for Nashville, and highly recommend that you get familiar with what's here and how it's used and how you can actually use it in your business. So thanks again, and feel free to stick around if you want to ask more questions on this. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Well,